Welcome back to Fridgestuck, where we talk about the allusions and references in Homestuck. Today we're covering the cute dog girl with the power of a god, Jade Harley. Jade Harley's name was suggested by Zeitlos Einsen on the old MS Paint Adventures forums. It's commonly believed that her name references her green text, her green thumb, and subsequently jade ore, a green rock that, in its raw form, looks similar to uranium's appearance in the comic. Her last name Harley retroactively comes from her adopted grandfather / biological father, Jake Harley, who named himself after his beloved family dog. His dog was more of a guardian to him than his own adopted grandmother. Of course, Grandpa Harley dies when Jade was very young, leaving her to be cared for by a dog, and later merges with that dog a couple years before meeting her grandson, Jake. It's a circle of life. I wonder how long Andrew Hussie was planning Jade's transformation, especially when you consider that the music used during Jade and Beck's strife is called An Unbreakable Union. I guess it helps that Hussie made Jade a furry, just not, in his words, a weird one. Her chum handle, Garden Gnostic, reflects her love of gardening, but it also references something a bit deeper. The word Gnostic, deriving from the Greek word gnostos for known, refers to someone who claims to have exclusive mystical or occult knowledge hidden from the rest of the world. This is fitting for Jade, who spent a lot of time on Prospect, seeing things that she otherwise would never have seen from the clouds of Skya. Not to mention that most Gnostic cults claim that the Earth was made on accident by a less than perfect god who's difficult to know. Jade Harley strifes with Riflekind, and eventually completely relies on her enhanced space powers gifted by the Green Sun, but she also wielded Paperkind when dealing with Bec Noir. Oddball problems require oddball solutions. And Jade is quite the oddball, a mesh of opposites to complement her fellow Spur Beta kids. She's the hothead to Dave's cool kid. Jade is Rosie while Rose is jaded, and then there's John, who starts out knowing nothing about this game that he's super excited to play, versus Jade knowing about the game for years, but showing no interest in playing it, and spending a good amount of the story asleep. Both John and Jade become super OP though. In Soundpage WV Ascend, the coordinates for Jade's house place it in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, just a few hundred miles southeast of Baker Island, in a part of international waters that is controlled by the United States. And in the fact that Jade's meteor destroyed what was most likely a US-based factory, and the doubts of her citizenship seem a little silly. Actually, how are any of the kids considered US citizens? They fell from meteors. How would their guardians even work around getting them birth certificates? Now we know why they're all homeschooled. Anyway, Andrew Hussie purposefully chose the spot for Jade's Island because the map of that section of ocean looked like it was edited out, making for a good mystery. Speaking of the Huss, when questioned on whether Vriska Serket was a parody of the Mary Sue archetype, Hussie denied it, saying that if any character was a parody Sue, it would be early versions of Jade. But even then, he didn't see her as one. Oddly enough, Jade probably owes Vriska a thank you for her awakening on Prospect, since Vriska kept using her powers to put Jade to sleep. Maybe it was that, and the fact that she had a first guardian keeping an eye on her. Dave's initial reaction to Becquerel is naturally a movie reference, describing the dog as a devil beast that should be taken out behind the woodshed where Jade should blow its head off. Jade says that she'll do nothing of the sort. But she does. Technically twice. Hussie mentions that the game entering cruxite items are symbolic to that particular kid's journey, gradually getting more complicated on the meaning as more kids enter the medium. Jade's, being last, is the most obscure. The Beck-shaped pinata symbolized the usually knowledgeable Jade having to take a literal shot in the dark, trusting her friend to follow through with the plan, even if it meant killing the same friend for its own good and the greater good of the universe. Though I might add that the surprise broken free from the pinata was ultimately Jack Noir's prototyping. Surprise! Jade's God tier design was created by a fan, Lexercise. Even though she was never depicted as having a tail in the webcomic, she is depicted with one in the epilogues.
Hey, you said you were not going to mention the epilogues at the start of the video.
True. You're right. I'll stop by saying, tail or no, Jade is an excellent host, and move on. What makes Jade's childhood even more unique than it already was is that she was raised in a similar manner to a troll, by her dog Becquerel. He was essentially a god, fitting considering Jade's birthday and lunar sway make her the sign Sagigo, the creator. And lastly, Beck was the only guardian, Lucis or otherwise, that is opposite to Jade's gender. You assume she's a girl? Dang it, Hussy, you're making this really difficult right now. And now it's time to explore the alternate universe. Alpha Jade enters the universe presumably on the same place Beta Jane did, with Alpha John to follow a little bit later. Just as similarly, the two siblings were raised by the Condescension in the guise of Betty Crocker. Following the rule of thumb of the Alphaverse being more difficult than the previous one, the Condis was crueler towards the children, with the standout detail being that the Troll Queen killed the family dog. This caused Jade to run away, leaving John behind. Years later, when she discovered who the Condis feared the most, Jade changed her last name to English and, in spite, created a tech company with a line of products that resembled Lord English. Eventually, Jake fell to Earth, Jade adopting him as her grandson. Jade moved the two of them to a familiar-looking island and began studying the ruins there. Unfortunately, Jade's location was found out, and Jake would find her dead in the jungle with 3 suspicious puncture wounds to the torso. Jake's house, shortly afterward, was blasted down by the Condis' airship, leaving the cause of Jade's death to be less ambiguous. Young Jake would later place Jade's ashes in the Frog Temple, and thus was the end of Jade English. Jade's planet is the land of frost and frogs, Lofaf. Ironically, she can't faff about because this land is a lot of work. Space players are given lands with frogs in them so that they, presumably with their night player, can breed the perfect universe-creating frog and then light the forge, usually a volcano from the player's homeworld, with the ring from the Carpathian Queens. Many Toho fans were also freaking the hell out over Lofaf, but Hussy swears that the overlap was not deliberate. What was deliberate was the choice of using the ruins of Ta Prohm in Cambodia for Jade's Imp Strife. If the area looks familiar, chances are you watched Tomb Raider at least once. Speaking of movie references, Jade is a whole cavalcade of references to The Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. She has an etch-a-ladder rung called Sayonara, Kansas, referencing Dorothy leaving Kansas and entering the land of Oz. When she and John travel between the game sessions, Jade says they have to follow the Yellow Yard, referencing the iconic and colorful Yellow Brick Road. Speaking of colorful, Jade's god-tier ruby slippers and striped tights are reminiscent of the Wicked Witch of the East from the 1939 film version, as is her just death with the house falling on her. On top of those allusions, Jade could fill out most of the main cast of The Wizard of Oz with only the alternative versions of herself. We've got Dorothy, the young girl swept into a fantasy world, who blacks out a little too much. Her dog Toto being her dog tier, the Wicked Witches being her Grimbark form, And then we got the Tin Man, her robot double, the Scarecrow, the stuffed airheaded dream version, and lastly, her cowardly lion is Jadesprite. Many people, Jade included, do not really care for Jadesprite's super depressed personality. But hey, if I was dead for several years paradoxically and then was suddenly resurrected in the middle of an important conversation, I'd be upset too. Another one of Jadesprite's many problems is that she cannot stop seeing the green sun, an experience that is apparently super painful. However, none of the other First Guardians seem to react this way towards the power source of the universe. This is probably because none of the other Guardians have eyes. To hammer this point home, Grimbark Jade is shown to literally have the green sun in her eyes. And the last Fridgestuck fact for Jade Harley is... Let's talk Tolkien for a bit. Author of The Lord of the Rings, and quoted as having a love-hate relationship with allegory and all its forms, J.R.R. Tolkien is considered by many to be the father of modern fantasy. This is due to Tolkien taking the planning of his fantasy worlds very seriously. He explained in a lecture on fairy stories on March 1939 that fantasy is more difficult to create over non-fiction, and because of this, most fantasy stories during his time were underdeveloped, focusing too much on established norms on what he called the primary world, thus leaving the so-called second world as merely fanciful. It's here that a familiar phrase for Homestucks appears. Anyone inheriting the fantastic device of human language can say, "the green sun." Many can then imagine or picture it, but that is not enough, though it may already be a more potent thing than many a thumbnail sketch or transcript of life that receives literary praise. To make a secondary world inside which the green sun will be credible, commanding secondary belief, will probably require labor and thought, and will certainly demand a special skill, a kind of elvish craft. Few attempt such difficult tasks, but when they are attempted and in any degree accomplished, then we have a rare achievement of art, indeed narrative art, story making in its primary and most potent mode. You done patting yourself on the back there? I bet you're feeling super clever on that, eh, hussy? This is getting close to hubris. Did you think no one would make this connection?
How did you learn about that anyway?
I literally saw this book at the library. Green Suns and Fairy, Essays on Tolkien.
You've got to be bloody kidding me.
Thank you guys so much for watching this Fridgestuck episode for Jade Harley. I hope you enjoyed. Any facts I missed? Do you have a character or concept that you'd like to see? Leave it down in a comment below and it might end up on the show someday. Be sure to give a like, comment, subscribe, and share with a friend. And check out my Patreon, and I will see you all next time. Bye!
Hey, how y'all? Get your fucking dog, bitch! It don't bite. Yes, it do! Get the...
Hey there. Consider becoming a patron, just like the phenomenal Gerald Thomas and Bleed Red.